Hello, everyone. Good Wednesday evening. I am Scotty Powell, a forecaster here at Burke Weather. Welcome to the August 6th edition of the Carolinas Weather Group. This is a weekly show that we do talking about different weather subjects in the Carolinas, Tennessee, and Virginia. And really excited about the show that we're going to have on tonight. I think this is the record for us having as many guests as we've got. We've got 3 guests tonight that we are excited to introduce to you guys. But before we do that, we'll go around to our regular panel members and let them introduce themselves and what areas they're from, and then we'll introduce our guests and we will start our discussion. Tonight we're going to kind of talk about the month of July in review. It was such a crazy weather month, from hurricanes to flooding to abnormally cold weather to thunderstorms and all kinds of good stuff, and we will go into that in depth tonight with our panelists tonight and our special guests. So with that, we will start all the way on the east side of the viewing area, and I will toss it to my good friend Ricky. Ricky?
Yeah, we're up here dealing with a few severe storms moving through the area. A severe thunderstorm warning out for portions of Isle of Wight and Suffolk until 8:45, and then some more heavy downpours moving through some parts of eastern Virginia, but relatively it's been quiet otherwise. Kind of warm. I've been gone for a week, so I've been up in Wisconsin where it rained on us 3 times during the air show, and I had to take shelter underneath the wing of an airplane, which is always the fun experience when the airtime day up here in Virginia today. Further west to Sam, who's at NC State.
Yeah, hey, what's up? Not much has been happening here lately. I mean, the past couple of days it's just been sunny, but it hasn't really been hot either. Today was the hottest day this week. But yeah, so not much is going on over here. Whoever's next.
I guess if we're working our way from east to west, that would be me. Good to be back, guys. I've not been here for a few weeks since we've been kind of had an active house here. As usual, the little bubble over my house has held true. I haven't seen much rain myself, but I guess I'll throw in a little bit of my news since we always share that on here. This past July, actually last week technically, my wife's book became a New York Times bestseller. So from now on, you guys can refer to me as the guy who married the New York Times bestseller. We'll go from there. I'll keep claiming that fame for a while. But anyway, just one quick note. Technical difficulty on my end. Back's been hurt really bad, so I'm totally doing the show laying on the bed for you guys because there was no way I could sit up for an hour. So that's why it kind of looks funny from here. But we'll work our way on to the west there, and we'll send it way over to Daniel in the mountains. Daniel?
Well, guys, it's great to be all night here from McDowell County, and it's a pretty warm day today. I'm not sure the exact high. I'd say mid-upper 80s. We did have a shower that come through here in the last half hour. Not much, just enough to get things wet a little bit, but, you know, we're just kind of going through this crazy pattern just like everybody else right now. It's cold one day, or excuse me, cold and dreary for 3 days in a row, it seems like, and then it breaks out, and then we get into it again, and it's just a never-ending cycle, it seems like. But I'm curious to see what's going to be happening here over the next few days, and I will kick it, I guess, to Scotty so he can get us started for our guest.
Thank you, Daniel. Very excited to have our guest on tonight. I'll introduce Brad Panovich first, Chief Meteorologist at NBC Charlotte. Brad is kind of a part-time panel member as he comes on at least every month and kind of shares his expertise with us. So, Brad, thank you for coming on the show tonight, and I'll let you talk a little bit about Charlotte since Ricky's not in Charlotte. What was the weather like today down there?
It was actually gorgeous today. We had mostly sunny skies, the warmest day we've seen in a while. We got up to 88 degrees this afternoon, and we had a rarity. We had a high of 88 and a low of 68, which was exactly the average high and low. A lot of people don't realize how rare that is. I had to look back, and We have a 136-year record book here in Charlotte. That's only happened 3 times ever on this date, including today. So a lot of people call that normal. I'm not a fan of the normal terminology, as you may or may not know. It's a 30-year average, and so it's kind of rare to actually see the high and low actually come out to be an average day for August 6th. But otherwise, it's been a pretty boring week getting ready for this big wedge, as I'm sure we'll talk about this again. Another cold front and summer wedge, which has just been kind of unreal this summer. I haven't seen anything like it in 11 years I've been in the Carolinas, and I will probably get more into that later. But it's definitely an interesting topic, and it's made for a very interesting summer weather-wise in the Carolinas.
Most definitely. Our second guest I'd like to bring on tonight is Chris Justus, working at WYFF, the NBC affiliate in the Greenville-Spartanburg area. Chris was on with us a couple of weeks ago, and we're excited to have him back. And Chris, kind of talk to us what the weather is like today in Greenville and Spartanburg.
Hey guys, yeah, the gorgeous weather out here today. We had a few pop-up storms up in the Asheville area. Other than that, it's been very hot and very humid outside, and that's been the case past couple of days. But it's really been about the rain last week. Some areas in Greenville County picked up about 8.5 inches of rain. That's more rain than those areas had both in May and June combined. So just an unheard of amount of rain catches us back up. We were behind about 1.5 inches. Now we're above average for about 3 inches in the Greenville area. So definitely some much needed rain, and we're probably going to see some more.
Okay. Yeah, and definitely, Chris, yeah, you definitely got the rain down there this past week. I was down at Panthers training camp Saturday, and it was you could tell, just swamped down there. A lot of rain. So. A lot of rain in the upstate. And then finally, I'm bringing on Chris Michaels. He is new to our show, and he's supposed to be on next week, but we decided to wrap him in for 2 weeks straight. So Chris Michaels, WCYV up in the Tri-Cities area in Tennessee. Welcome to the show, Chris.
Hey, thanks, Scotty. Yeah, first time here. I've been in the business for all of 3 months now. Weather around here has been pretty interesting, dating back to last Sunday when we had 3 tornadoes come through the viewing area. It's the first tornado report that we've had within our viewing area since March of 2012. So as you can imagine, that's a pretty big deal. Yesterday, we hit the warmest high temperature that we've hit in 2 weeks, which was 87. So the past few days have been generally low to mid-80s, sunshine, but looks like we'll hopefully see some rain because this has been the 9th driest year to date on record at the Tri-Cities Airport.
And we were talking a little bit off the show here tonight. Chris pulled a 20-hour shift last Sunday. Isn't that correct, Chris?
Yeah, I was in because I'm the weekend morning meteorologist. So I got in around 2 a.m. and didn't leave until about 9:30. I actually had my news director drive me home from work because I didn't feel comfortable behind the wheel of the car.
Yeah, especially with all the tornadoes and stuff there. I know that was stressful. So with that, I will turn it over to Ricky and Joey. I think they're going to kind of co-host the interview tonight. So, boys, have at it.
All right. Thank you very much, Scotty. I kind of wanted to recapping like the whole month of July's weather by taking it back pretty much as far as we can go. And the first big event that popped off in my mind, that was Hurricane Arthur back on July 4th. Kind of a little bit in July 3rd, July 4th, I guess. It made land for Sandy in the coast of North Carolina. So, any of you guys talk about how unprecedented, or how uncommon it is, I should say, to get a landfalling hurricane in July when most of our storms usually come towards some of the later summer months, August, September-ish.
Also, it was a pretty rare event overall. I mean, I think I remember look back at the database, and in the Morehead City area, I don't think there's been a landfall in that location, Atlantic Beach area, ever. There's been a lot of storms that have passed nearby, but for a landfall right there, Cape Lookout area, I don't think that's ever happened, let alone in July. The other thing that was really interesting about this storm is it looked super impressive on radar. It had this great category. It did literally no damage compared to a thunderstorm line in the Carolinas. It was just unbelievable, the lack of damage and really impact that it actually had. The biggest impact ended up being the fact that many people had to cancel their beach plans for the 4th of July weekend. So it's kind of interesting. I think the biggest lost dollar amount is going to be because of lost tourism on the coast. And I haven't seen a storm that looked that great on radar and satellite do such little fanfare. And I think there's a lot of meteorology going on in there, that the fact that it was a fast-moving system, it was slow, didn't have time to build up a storm surge, and because of the direction it was moving kind of parallel to the coast, it really didn't shove a lot of water inland. So there were a lot of factors going in our favor that made it kind of a lesser threat storm, but it was interesting. I kind of downplayed it initially, then it got kind of crazy there for a while, and then ended up at the end of the day that it really wasn't that big of a deal, except for everybody having to cancel their Outer Banks 4th of July plans.
And Chris,
Yeah, I mean,
I was going to say, I think Chris Justus, you were actually covering that. Is that correct?
Yeah, they sent me down there, one of those long shifts like Chris was talking about, on every show. Whenever they pay the money to send you to the beach, you're going to be on for every newscast. So 4:30 in the morning, and then on that previous night at 11 till 11:30. So it was pretty rough, but like Brad was saying, it was a lot of hoopla, a lot of really not even a whole lot of rain. I mean, it just rained steady there for a while. The wind picked up. Some of the gusts were pretty good, but the sustained winds were not enough to warrant canceling any vacations. And I try to say that a lot on air, just to keep from people canceling their vacations, because people freak out whenever they hear hurricane off the Carolina coast. So that was my ordeal with it. I think I'm having some camera troubles here, but hopefully you guys can still hear me.
Oh,
We can hear you fine.
Good.
Yeah, Chris, it's funny you say that. I think I spent most of the week leading up to that telling people not to change their beach plans, and then people are giving me a hard time about it. But the problem was that so many people from Savannah, Hilton Head, Charleston, Myrtle Beach, Holden Beach, all these people are thinking they have to cancel their plans for the 4th, and I try to tell people not to cancel, and it really ended up being just a small segment of the Outer Banks where there was the evacuation. And like you said, even there, they probably could have just rode out one bad beach day and been fine.
Yeah, that was the case. A lot of people down there were wondering, oh, it's just a bad storm. We're not going anywhere. But I do know when it was happening, it at first at least it was kind of worrisome. Just that jog to the east didn't happen as early as we thought. And I was looking at that late that night. Maybe I was just delirious from being up so early. But I was like, whoa, this is a little interesting. But it did eventually make its eastern curve.
Yeah, the folks in Wilmington were a little scared there for a while when it looked like it was going to plow into Wilmington, and then it finally did take its little jaunt to the northeast there.
It's playing chicken with them, I guess.
Hey, I have a question for you guys. Sorry, Ricky. I just got one question I want to mention right quick. Brad, you talked about how the storm got together so quick, and how you have a inland not really an inland impact, but right on the coast so early in the year. Are you surprised at how strong it actually got for a storm in July? Because that seems to be pretty rare too.
Yeah, it did. I mean, there's a couple things going on. First, it's over really warm water. It tracked right up the Gulf Stream, which was like, if you want a sea surface temperature storm, that's great, because a lot of times you hear people talk about, okay, warm water. Well, the Gulf Stream is not only warm, it's deep warm water. That's really warm water to a very great depth. The other thing is, you remember it was interacting with a trough, and for all the weather nerds out there, when you're interacting with a trough, especially if you can move parallel to that northeast to south, southwest to northeast flow, it actually helps ventilate the storm. And so when it's kind of in between that ridge to the east and the trough to the west, that actually can help enhance the storm. And sometimes you'll get those big wind fields. We get that a lot with with the nor'easters on the coast. The wind fields spread out and get really strong because of that interaction with the trough. So the combination of being over that very warm water and having the trough interaction, which by the way, that was a strong trough for July. That would be like a September trough when we'd have a system come up the coast. Helps enhance the storm a little bit. So I think the combination of those two really made it stronger, but it also made it move much quicker. I think that's the other thing that was kind of interesting, is how fast the storm moves. Typically, late summer, early hurricane season storms are pretty slow movers because there's no fronts, there's no troughs, so we're kind of stuck in the doldrums of summer. And as we're going to talk about more later, this has been anything but a normal summer.
Yeah, and speaking on how fast that storm was, we got to Hatteras on that first day. It was sunny all day. as soon as it got dark, rain and wind started picking up, and the worst of it was probably like 1 in the morning. And we called it a night at like 4 a.m. We went to sleep, woke up the next morning, it's perfectly sunny again. You would never know there was a hurricane.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think when you talk about trying to compare it to other storms, because in North Carolina we have a little bit of a fear ever since Dennis and Floyd, and then even Tropical Storm Andrea, because I was only in North Carolina since 2007, so Tropical Storm Andrea is really the only tropical system that I remember from living in Raleigh. That did more damage than Arthur did. I mean, I remember driving through torrential downpours and trees down everywhere. You didn't really see much of damage with Arthur. So I think our paranoia comes from the fact that we've had to deal with some slow-moving systems in the past, and this one just was not the case.
Yeah, and then there was the Alex storm, which I think a lot of people on the Outer Banks, that storm that kind of got up to the Outer Banks, looked like it was going to be weak, and then all of a sudden popped up to a Cat 2 and caused some pretty significant damage out there. Our John Wendell, our meteorologist here, he was actually out there on vacation, ended up covering the storm for us, and was kind of a surprise storm. So I heard a lot of comparisons, this could be another Alex, but Alex was a much different system. It was later in the season, and it was more typical of like a Cape Verde storm that came across the whole Atlantic. This was just been a weird summer, and it goes to show that we should have a weird tropical system in the Carolinas just to go with the rest of the weird weather we've had.
Definitely.
At least it hasn't started snowing yet, so we have that.
It's early yet. Come on.
Brad, you mentioned how strong some of these troughs have been. Comment on that for a minute, and how uncommon it is to get troughs that have such strong winds aloft and such steep cold air this time of the year.
Yeah, it's really weird. Chris kind of talked about this. He had to cover those tornadoes. I mean, when's the last? I had to look. This was the first tornado watch I could find, at least in the database, issued from GSP's area in the month of July. We've had a couple in June, and we've had a couple in August because of tropical systems, but I couldn't find one since 2005 of a tornado watch. Not even a warning, a watch. Because you just don't get the wind shear in the summer to really warrant a tornado watch in the middle of the summertime. You obviously get some quick spin-ups, but in the 11 years that I've worked in this market, I've never seen these many cold fronts and deep troughs come down in the summertime. This is going to end up being a pretty cool summer. It's not going to be super cool, but the cool summers that I'm accustomed to, we had a really cool summer in 2004 and 2003. That was because we got stuck in an MCS track. We just got MCS after MCS. It was northwest flow, and it was a wet, wet, wet summer. So our cool summers were because of a lot of rain. This year, there's been pockets of rain, but it really hasn't been rain. It's just been these troughs and cold air from Canada. I mean, I just can't imagine that we would get 8 to 9 cold fronts by this time since the beginning of June in the southeast. And these things aren't cheapies. They're not like they're making it to Charlotte installing. This last front made it all the way to northern Florida before it occluded. And I just have never seen that. And I wish we kept more stats like this. I know a blogger up in New Jersey sent me a quick thing on Twitter about he actually went back and counted the number of frontal passages, and it was 8, I think, since June 22nd. But I count at least 3 wedge events, cold air damming events, and they're summer. Trust me, they're not classic wedge events, and 8 cold fronts since the beginning of June. I just have never seen anything like that. So what you saw in July was we had these tornado outbreaks in Tennessee and Kentucky, and we had a rare tornado watch and a tornado warning in Avery County. These are things you just don't normally see in the southeast this time of year. We're dominated by the Bermuda High, typically bringing in southeasterly winds and upslope in the lee trough. The lee trough is our summer weather maker here in the Carolinas typically, or the sea breeze if you're a little farther east.
Yeah, and just feeding off of that with what happened on Sunday the 27th, I think what made that an easy forecast when you talk about, because summertime forecasting can just be a pain sometimes, but talking about that wind shear, you then know what kind of storm organization you're going to get. And when I woke up early that morning and started seeing the models pumping out some really strong wind shear, I started calling my guys in and saying, hey, supercells are possible. You start to look at the storm organization there, and for summertime to have as many fronts as you've been saying, and a front of that magnitude, you had to know right off the bat that when those latest model runs came in, you saw that wind shear, that it was going to be an easy forecast, but tough night ahead. And also with the wedge pattern, just this past weekend, Elizabethton, Tennessee was 81 degrees at one point, and then right over the mountain in Boone and Jefferson, it was 58. I mean, that's what makes a forecaster, meteorologist, that's what makes your day when you see things like that happening. So it's just been one heck of a month, especially even from my perspective. I'm on the other side of the mountain, but we still get to see some pretty cool things happen.
All right, well, we talked about what has happened, what occurred. Do you guys have any theories on why that it's been like that? I mean, this is obviously not normal. Not to use Brad's word normal, but I mean this isn't the way this isn't what usually happens for a summer. So what's causing it? Why are we having so many fronts? Why do we keep getting these cold air damming events?
Well, not to get too overly technical, there's a lot of stuff going on in the Pacific that's driving a lot of this. You've seen all these massive typhoons recurving in the western Pacific, and you've seen this monster ridge on the west coast, which has baked California for the better part of a year now, and giving them this epic drought, the historic proportions. You just have this persistent troughiness on the East Coast, which has really led to, just cold fronts, cold air, a lot of blocking in the North Atlantic. I mean, there's a lot of patterns of teleconnections in the Pacific that have a big impact. And yes, I do think some Arctic sea ice melting is amplifying the jet stream a little bit, though I think that's a little overblown. But you combine these all, and you end up getting these huge swings in the jet stream, which is definitely driving this. But typically those type of patterns are more prevalent in the cool season, the transition seasons. To see it in summer is really, really rare. I mean, I'm going to share my screen here if I can get this thing to work, and kind of show you. I think this graphic is really kind of key to like what the year has been like. This is the I'll share it right now. This has been this is the temperature departure for the entire year, and I mean you can pretty much draw where the jet stream has been on this map. Ridge west, take the Rocky Mountains, draw a trough, and the whole eastern 2/3 of the country from the first of the year to now has been not just a couple degrees. The Great Lakes have been 8-10 degrees below average for now. We're going on the 8th consecutive month. I mean, it's just crazy. And don't discount the fact that the Great Lakes are at record low water temperatures as well. That does a lot to the pattern as well. You get these cool air masses coming down, and they're coming over some nice chilly water. So it definitely leads to some cooler air. So it's just been a crazy pattern, and I think the most difficult thing for me is going to be how is this going to translate into the fall and winter pattern, because I'm already getting the ridiculous winter forecast questions, and I'm one of those people. I've tried seasonal forecasting for 8 years now. I'm like conservatively 5 for 8 on those forecasts. And I say conservative because verification seasonal forecast is kind of like if you're anywhere near the ballpark, you kind of feel like you're okay. But I have to see how the summer plays out, how the hurricane season plays out, and how fall starts before I could even seriously consider about what the winter is going to be like.
And Chris Justus, even in the upstate of South Carolina, you guys have seen several records, I believe, in that area with low temperatures in the mornings and heavy rain as well.
Yeah, it's been more so up toward the mountains. We cover Asheville, and it's been more so up there. Getting some of those records. I mean, chilly weather. I mean, you walk out the door and it feels crisp out there. It's amazing in July to feel that. But like Brad said, the crazies are already coming out. Where's your winter forecast? I need to know. I mean, come on, we gotta give it a little longer. I mean, I'm a nerd about it. I mean, if I could figure it out now, or whatever my guesstimate's going to be, for sure. But I mean, like Brad said, there's just so much you got to look out for in the coming months before you can even give it a thought.
Hey, I got a question for our 3 guests. I got a buddy of mine that lived here in McDowell County. He recently moved to Waycross, Georgia. Or not, excuse me, not Waycross, but Valdosta. And he's been telling me about how it's been very dry and hot down there all summer, whereas we've been getting a lot of stuff. And I always notice when I look at weather maps, computer model maps, you tend to see areas of high pressure, especially like at the 850 level. They've been tending to form over Florida this year. That just seems like it's really unusual. We had the big deep troughs that develop in the east and off the east coast, and then a lot we tend to get high pressure tends to be forming over the state of Florida. Is there any reason why that would be happening?
Well, I think a little bit of what's going on down there is the troughs haven't been deep enough to get all the way into central and southern Florida. So a lot of times, especially in these wedge setups where the ridge, you got a trough coming down and you got surface ridging in the east, man, if you're on the outside of that wedge down in southern Georgia, southern Alabama, northern Florida, it is hotter than Hades down there. And you've also had a lot of dry air coming across the Atlantic. If you look carefully at like some of those Sahara air layers coming across the Atlantic this season, it's kind of similar to last season when the hurricane season got squashed by all that dry air. You're seeing a lot of dry air, which is stabilizing the atmosphere because you're getting not only warm air at the surface, you're getting warm air, like you said, aloft. And that is just causing sinking air, and you're getting super warm air. Not only because here's the thing, remember, Florida is in a drought, and so is a lot of the Caribbean. The Caribbean islands are super dry. I was looking at Puerto Rico just the other day because I was watching Bertha cross over, and people down there are like, this is the best rain they've seen in a long time when Bertha crossed over, and I didn't realize how dry it had been in Puerto Rico. You think of it as this tropical oasis. And so I started looking at the Lesser Antilles and the Virgin Islands. They're all dying for rain down there. So this ridging pattern, as you alluded to, has been pretty strong across the Gulf of Mexico, Florida, the Bahamas, and all of the Caribbean. It is a really weird pattern. And I think that's another thing that's kind of leading to our cooler than average weather up here.
And speaking of rainfall, Chris, I seen your video earlier today. You guys have had a lot of rain in the upstate throughout the past month or so. I can't remember how much you said was above average, but I knew it was quite a lot.
Yeah, we Greenville County over toward it was like a swath between Anderson to Greenville to Spartanburg, right up 85 really. There was about 8.5 inches, just a lot of training going on. The same areas just got pounded, and we went from having just a rainy morning to a rainy afternoon to a rainy evening, and it just did not stop. Simpsonville, which is a little bit south of Greenville, was the big winner. They picked up about 8 inches, so this unheard of amounts and caused some damage. 5 people had to be evacuated from their homes. So I was supposed to have an easy day that day because I was doing the morning show for our morning guy. Didn't work out like that. I was live all shows and didn't get home till 7:30. That's how it goes, though.
Man, that's brutal.
Yeah.
I saw that thing form, Chris, before I left at 11 o'clock the night before, and I woke up the next morning and it was still in the same spot. I'm like, what's going on down there? Yeah.
But if you guys ever need a day off, all you got to do is just call me and stand there. Because if I'm anywhere near you, it won't rain and it'll get rid of everything, so you'll be good.
It's funny you say that, Joey, because I'm getting ready to write a blog about the quote-unquote bubbles that everyone has over their house in town. Because it's really funny. I think it's a thing that actually happens quite a bit, and it's more psychological than reality. Confirmation and recency bias is what it is. So it should be an interesting blog when I'm done. But I think it's going to be interesting. That people kind of always say it because I get this every summer. And it's funny. It's every town. It doesn't matter where you live. I get hey, there's a bubble over Mooresville. There's a bubble over Harrisburg. There's a bubble over. I'm like, it can't be a bubble everywhere.
Yeah, I'm with you. I'm with you on the psychology thing. And it probably drives me even more nuts because I'm the guy who always, if there's a storm coming, I'm excited and I'm waiting for it, and they just keep dying right before they get here. And I mean, Scotty can tell you, it's been like that all year. Except for when I left. When I left, it poured. So,
I'm telling you, downtown Morganton. I don't know who's made Jesus mad, but it had 3 microbursts that hit the same area. I mean, I don't even think there's a tree standing left. I mean, it's crazy. I mean, it has really downtown.
And all of those were like really small scale, short lived, just like right over downtown and then done. I mean, like one volume scan, there's a microburst, boom, it's gone. It was odd.
Yeah, I mean, it's just like these people they're just like, what's going on here? And you're just like, hey, just that's the area it's picked to do that this year. But
But you mean
honestly,
tornado, right, Joey? Joey,
Yeah,
Scott, those are tornadoes, right?
That's
You're
right.
right. They always are. Yeah,
Always a tornado.
if a tree goes down, it was a tornado.
Yeah.
No doubt.
Yeah, we know all about that after last Sunday. Everybody was calling about the tornado that hit their backyard.
Yeah. Thousands and thousands of tornadoes.
Joey, the reason you're not getting any rain is because you got over 13 inches in one day last year. So
Yeah, you're right. We used up all of ours. That was, I guess that was a year ago last week. That was,
last July and August. Do you guys remember some of those rainfalls? It was ridiculous.
It was July 27th last year. We had like 13. In fact, there was some radars up estimates in some areas where I know there was nobody that had a rain gauge. It was like 15, 16 inches in some areas. So
that was a Saturday morning, if I'm not mistaken.
It was a Saturday morning. My mom usually doesn't work on weekends. She had to go to work that morning, and everywhere she kept calling me, she's like, "This road's flooded. I don't know how to get to work." Everywhere you went. I mean, there were literally that day. There was places underwater where I know I've lived here 30 years, 31 years, 33 years, however old I am. I've lived here my whole life, and there were areas that were flooded. I mean, there's not even a creek there. There's no water there. I don't even know where it came from. So it was definitely an interesting morning. I know you guys have had your long days. That was my long day. So but you guys were talking about this pattern that we're in and causing all of these all the fronts and all the events of the summer. And we've been in it for a while. It even goes back, into the winter. How much longer? Any thoughts? Any guesses? I mean, obviously it's probably a guess at this point, but I mean, what do you think I was thinking? I mean, are we stuck here for another winter?
Well, one of the things that when I was living in Raleigh this last year, because I went to school at NC State, we had a really wet summer in Raleigh, and I know in other parts of North Carolina, and it was abnormally cool, and then the winter came, and it was, for the most part, an abnormally cool winter, at least in central North Carolina. And talking about fronts coming through, in 2013, I don't know the exact numbers, but we still had quite a few frontal systems come through, and I remember talking with the meteorologist. I was interning with Lee Ringer from Time Warner Cable News, and he was even saying, this is not normal for us to have these fronts coming through this time of year. So if that's any indication, you hate to just go saying, oh, last year was like this, so this year is going to be like it too. But the patterns are fairly similar, especially when you take into account the amount of frontal passages in the summer months. So, I'm not one for seasonal forecasting, but if you're going to look ahead like that, then that's a fairly good guess on my part.
I'd say history is kind of bound to repeat itself. You get in these patterns, and it's kind of like a pattern of, they just kind of get habits, I guess you could say. It may not be scientific, but I've seen history kind of repeat itself over and over again. So maybe.
Well, you got to think that as long as that drought is still going on out west and it stays cool in the east, I mean, sometimes you're right. Those are like self-fulfilling prophecies. When you have dry ground and surface temperatures are really warm, it helps enhance the ridging. I mean, and if it stays moist in the east, a rainy, cool pattern, that helps reinforce troughing. I mean, so like I said, the Great Lakes are still cool. That's going to lead to troughiness in the Great Lakes region. Even if it's at the surface, it will help build troughiness through the summer. And you look at like the climate models, those are always fun to look at if you're a soothsayer, but they still show persistent troughing on the East Coast through most of August. So and then you get into September, it's like, well, what's going to happen here? And I'm one of those people, you forecast, you stick with continuity until something makes you change your mind. And I think I'm going to just stick with, I did that today, actually. It was funny. John Wendell and I were talking. I saw a couple forecasts go in the low 90s today, and the guidance was way up in the low 90s, and I went 89 or 90, and we only got to 88. That's because the last 3 days we've underperformed temperature-wise every single day, even though everything looking at, sunny skies, a little bit of downsloping, we should have been in the low 90s. So until I see something that makes me change my mind, I'm going to go on the cool side and wet side of everything until the pattern changes.
Right.
Yeah.
One of the things we need to take into account, I think, with the upcoming season, and one of my synoptics professors, he planted this thought in my head, is that with an inactive hurricane season, and I'm not saying that that's what it's going to be, but the top forecasters like Bill Gray and like Leon Shea from NC State, they predicted a less active season. So at that point, you have less heat transport up towards the poles. So what accounts for that then later on is it's those cyclogenesis off the coast, like we saw all the time last year, riding up the East Coast. That may account for the lack of heat transport that you've had in the summer. So again, that's like Chris was just saying, might be history repeating itself.
Yeah, at some point you got to get that heat from the equatorial regions to the poles somehow, and mid-latitude cyclones are just as efficient as hurricanes sometimes. I think a good question though is what's going to happen with El Nino. We all, I think there was an overhype on how strong this El Nino was. I got real sick and tired of hearing the super El Nino thing thrown out there when there was really no evidence to say, okay, that it was a sure bet. But you almost saw like people with certainty saying, oh, it's going to be as huge. And now, I mean, the temperatures have flatlined in the East Pacific. It's like this might be a minor El Nino, and there's a small chance, though I would give it maybe 20, 30%, that it could stay neutral if the trade winds don't get going again.
Mm-hmm.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, we were talking about how much cooler. How cool were we? I mean, what was our departure from normal temperature-wise throughout the area?
Well, for our area, I'll share the screen, and you can kind of see all this site, by the way. If you don't use the Southeast Regional Climate Center page, you're doing it wrong. This is a great page, and this is just July. This was the average temperature. Now, you can see Charlotte, we weren't crazy, but we have 136 years of record. So when you have the 22nd coolest and the 32nd coolest, depending on the time frame, that's pretty cool. But look at some of these. I mean, you had a lot of locations that were top 5, top 10 coolest Julys on record. And Daniel brought up a good point about Florida. Look at the change in Florida. You go to Florida, and you have the flip-flop. You have some places that had the hottest July on record. So it's kind of interesting to look at this. But August, I mean, August was off to a ridiculously cold start. The first 2 days, it was 70 and 72 for highs in Charlotte, North Carolina for the first 2 days of August. I mean, that's the coldest first 2 days of August on record here. And so we've got a lot of ground to catch up. And today was the first day of August that we've actually been near average. So we've got a long ways to go to catch up. And I just think June was the only month for us that was really below average wise. And so unless we see a big flip-flop, I think August is going to be cool. And we're going to see 2 months of cool weather, 1 month of warm weather is going to end up being a cooler than average summer, at least for the Charlotte area.
Yeah, Scotty, I was talking to you about
Brad, did we?
I'm sorry?
No, go ahead. I was just going to say, did we even hit 100 in any areas? Any of you comment on that as well?
Not here. We have not hit 100 yet.
Not here either. Nope.
No, not here.
96 is our hottest so far.
Yeah, but Scotty, I was talking to you beforehand about the hours and hours of research I put into some climate data because I have my day off, so what's more to do than research climate data on the Southeast Regional Climate Center. So I don't really know how to share screens or anything, but I'm looking at my Excel spreadsheet here that I made. When you take things back 30 years and you put it within regards to the average temperature, Raleigh, Charlotte, and Asheville, this has been the 7th coolest year in the past, 7th coolest summer to date in the past 30 years.
Give a quick shout out to William Schmidt there at the Southeast Regional Climate Center. Williams helped me out on a numerous research assignment that I've done. So everybody's using the website there, so better give a shout out to him for that. We're getting 20 minutes, say, until the end of the show. I know you guys don't like to do long-range forecasting, but let's just say, for instance, we're stuck in this pattern. Mm-hmm. If we stay in this pattern, give all those winter forecaster people make them all happy. Let them know what would winter be like if we stay in this? If we don't get out of this pattern.
Oh, Well, here's the thing I will tell you, and this is kind of like what last winter was. As cold as people think last winter was, it actually, from a temperature standpoint, it really wasn't something that would jump off the map to me. But it was pretty wet. We had a lot of winter precipitation. And I think if there's one thing I'll say about this upcoming winter, I'm not sold on it being super cold. I certainly don't think it's going to be warm, but I do think it's going to be a very stormy pattern. I mean, just based on the current pattern, and even if you have a weak El Nino, that usually is cool and wet for the southeast. So the one thing I'm highly confident in, at least at this point, is that I think it's going to be a wet winter. And take from that what you want. If it's wet and you can time out some cold air, you're definitely going to get some winter weather around here.
And that's it right there. It's so hard to get the moisture around here. It can be plenty cold, but then you have no moisture. So
Yeah.
I would have to agree with Brad there. If we're going to have more moisture, you're going to have the cold air time up at some point. So snow lovers delight. If you put 2 and 2 together, I guess it equals more snow if you have a stormier pattern. But again, we're so far out. We're flipping a coin.
Right.
By the way, that loud noise you just heard was everybody cheering for the snow.
Yeah. But honestly, it's like last winter. I think this is where I love my confirmation bias that I love people always talk about. It's like the psychology of weather. I think a lot of people think this winter was so horrible for the Carolinas, but it really comes down to like one storm or 2 storms that really define the whole winter. And when you go back and look at the numbers, I like how Chris has his spreadsheet. I do this myself because it's like whenever I think it's cold in my house, I go over and look at the thermometer and I say, okay, it's just me. It's not really cold here. When I think it's been a snowy or cold winter, I go look at the actual numbers and then I convince myself that, okay, I thought it was a cold and snowy winter, but the numbers actually don't reveal that. We had a snowy winter. We did. We had a top 10 snowiest winter in Charlotte just because we had a 1-foot snowstorm over a 2-day period. But from a temperature standpoint, like I said, it really wasn't that cold. People just remember that big snowstorm and figure that's what happened the entire winter when it was only a 2-day event that really defined the whole winter for people. I think people already were talking about how cold July and August has been. People don't look back at June. In Charlotte, it was almost 2 degrees above average for the month of June. So people forget about June already, even though we're into the early August.
When you talk about that confirmation bias, I mean, when being in North Carolina last year, it was not the coolest winter that I felt in my time there. But actually, I wasn't even there for this. I was in Spain. There was a day where the high in Raleigh was 25 and the low was 9. That's what you're going to remember. You're not going to remember the days where you were well above the normal. And also, we have the picture from NC State of the fire being set off and all the cars on the side of the road. You're going to remember things like that. You're going to remember those visuals, and everything else is just fluff. We're getting it right now where we've had a few record lows overnight, and all of a sudden, global climate change is no such thing because you've had a few days where you've reached record lows.
That's so true, Chris. I mean, it's social media has made it worse because we can visualize so many of these big events, much more than we could before. And you make a good point. The only thing that makes me always, when people were sending me emails and posts like this, I've lived here 30 years and this is the coldest winter I've experienced. I said, you don't remember 2010? It was just a couple years ago. It was way colder. That was a top 5 coldest winter on record for Charlotte. It was just a couple years ago. So you don't have to look back to the 30s, 40s, or 50s. You only have to look back a couple years ago. But, I mean, like many people, they can't remember what they had for dinner last night. So you can't expect people to remember what the weather was like a couple years ago.
And Chris and Brad, I know you guys can probably empathize with me here. It's like when you have 100 people comment on a post, 99 of them are very positive towards you. They love you, and then there's the one guy or girl who just hates your guts, and you're always going to remember that one person.
Yeah. Well, Joey has a lot of time, Chris, so you just got to remember that.
I've got a lot of other profiles I like to use to come talk to you guys.
Are you catfishing us?
I've got some haters out there too. I'm not gonna lie.
Oh yeah, man.
I'd say if Joey's got that one that he lets me see a couple of times. I mean, he just gets way down there. I feel sorry for him.
Yeah. I have yet to make a correct forecast. I don't know, in probably a couple years now. So I'm 0 for about 600 with her. So, but anyway,
she's still on your page though. I mean, that's the great thing about it, you know.
Hey, she comes on there every day to tell me I'm wrong. So, I was gonna say you're talking about cold. People remembering the cold. I remember. I think it was '89. I was pretty young, so I don't know exactly the year. I think it was '89. I remember we had an outside oil, heating oil tank. The lines froze.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, so you could talk about which. Don't get me wrong. My uncle still lives in the same house. He didn't say he had any problems. This past winter, but I know it wasn't that cold because I can actually remember being 8 or 9 years old, I guess it was. So it had to be 88, 89, somewhere in there, and looking out the window and watching my grandparents try to wrap the pipes to keep them warm because the lines had froze. So, yeah, I know that this past winter wasn't the coldest winter ever because that one was definitely, even if that was just one night, it beat it. I promise you.
Hey, Chris Justus, I have kind of a different kind of question because I know you're in the agricultural business. What is this cooler summer? What is it going to do to the crops coming out in the fall and the effects on that?
Well, we do apples. Those are our main things. The drier weather this year, not being, well, up until now, has made the apples smaller. So you have a slightly smaller apple whenever it's not as wet. Last year, with all the rain that Asheville had, our farm is in Hendersonville, just south of Asheville, but with all the rain that Asheville had, led to apples that are normally, like you'd see in a grocery store, just a softball size almost, which isn't bad, but smaller apples tend to have a lot more taste. So a lot of our apples this year, so the slightly drier spring and early start to summer has led to smaller, tastier apples. So
I want an apple. I want an apple.
We're open now.
We know where to come get some good apple desserts now.
Oh yes,
yeah.
Oh yes. Fried apple pies, got it all.
I just want to point out something. We had almost a 10-minute conversation on winter and not one mention of a polar vortex.
Oh my.
Oh,
Wow.
the abominable polar death machine, right?
Yeah.
No sideways tornado talk either, which is good.
I got that horizontal tornado before too.
Well, now that Joey brings that up, we've got 3 experts on here, and you guys go ahead and squish that. Go ahead and squish that myth.
4 experts.
Where to begin? Hey, here's the thing about a lot of these terms. It's great in some sense that people love to talk about the science of weather now. I cringe, though, that they're just turning it into something it's not. I just like correct use of polar vortex. I mean, I've been talking about the polar vortex for winters on end, but you talk about it up in the polar regions, helping to pinwheel cold air to the south. These media publications and websites and even national media that show this giant polar vortex moving out of the polar regions and coming down to the lower 48. That's just not the way it works. And unfortunately, it's in the lexicon now. It's in the AP style guide. There's advertisers who use it in their winter advertising now. I guess we're just going to have to deal with it. It's the new haboob, derecho, polar vortex. You remember when El Nino was first a big deal in the late 90s? I still remember that. I'm old enough to remember. You would have thought El Nino was like this brand new thing, and everyone in California was like, "What? El Nino is like we know El Nino because that's when we get our big storm." So I remember the Chris Farley skit from Saturday Night Live, the El Nino skit, because he made fun of it as like this El Nino wrestler. It was hilarious.
That's classic right there.
I need to see a skit on the polar vortex, and I don't know who would play the polar vortex, but that would be pretty cool.
I think Al Roker would, Brad. We're both NBC affiliates, so you gotta love Al Roker. But he discovered Google and discovered that the polar vortex was such a thing, and it happened. So
it's Arctic tornado, right?
Exactly.
If Al Roker doesn't do it, I nominate Joey.
There you go.
And I will pull off the skit without pooping my pants like Al Roker.
One thing about the polar vortex, because we had to contend with it here, because I work at an NBC affiliate as well, and I wrote a blog post about it, and I said, are we going to call it the polar vortex every time we have jet stream intrusion in the southeast? We get that the jet stream, according to NOAA, is the edge of the polar vortex. So is it going to be that every time it comes down, we're just going to refer to this big, monstrous term that I call the abominable polar death machine? And you guys will start to hear some of my philosophy. I know I'm only 3 months in the business, but I've tried to develop some philosophy towards communicating weather with the probability of precipitation forecast. Sometimes less is more. The less you say, the more effect you have on your viewers. And if you start throwing these terms out there, you start to confuse people, you start to scare people. And Brad, I know you saw the post that our job is to prepare people and not scare people when potentially hazardous weather is on the way. And when you start throwing terms out like polar vortex, you start naming winter storms, derecho, El Nino, you start to scare people. And for some it might be a ratings jump, but for all of us here, whether you're broadcast, whether you're independent forecaster, whether you're with the National Weather Service, your job is to prepare people and potentially save lives. It shouldn't be about ratings anymore.
Yeah. No, I applaud you, Chris, for that, because in recent years, it's because of some of the conferences and research I've done, I've become a big advocate of social science involved in forecasting the weather. And terms have to have meaning. And if the polar vortex means one thing to so many of the public now, then you're doing a disservice by describing every cold outbreak as the polar vortex. Because you saw this summer. I saw even in Charlotte, people wanting to know if they would have to cover their plants in the middle of July because the polar vortex was coming down. Because they perceived it as what it meant during the winter. And they thought it was going to be these below zero temperatures coming into the Great Lakes, and we were going to have frost in the middle of summer. So that's why, even though I applaud people who are trying to use it correctly and said, hey, I'm not using it for hype, you're still, it's just like the reason we don't have another Hurricane Hugo or Hurricane Katrina. You change the names because those terms now have a certain meaning with the public, and using it in a certain way is not conveying the information correctly. So I'm all with you there. I probably won't even use the term anymore because I feel like it's got another meaning now for what my scientific understanding of it is. So I shy away from it as much as possible, and I try to correct it whenever I see NBC use it or anchors use it. I cringe, and I'm like, please don't use that. It's just, because it does. It hurts. And it's the thing. Here's the thing, and Chris makes a good point. It's just not my forecast or the information I'm talking to. When somebody else uses it that doesn't even watch me, that it actually ends up degrading my credibility because people hear it in other places on Facebook and Twitter. It's just like when I got in my rant about social media forecasting and people who do it irresponsibly. No one in this room does, by the way. But how it impacts all of us, even the people that run other pages and stuff, because it degrades your ability to forecast because people then think less of the profession of meteorology. And so I just think it's just a poor term to use because it was used in the wrong, for the wrong reasons and in the wrong way.
Half of our job is cleaning up after producers, and much less having to answer to people on social media. You have the terms they hear on national, and we're trying to correct them half the time, and it's a battle. They don't know any different. They're just hearing it from other social media avenues. So it's a battle that we face not only with our forecasting, but trying to answer for other people as well.
Yeah, and that's awesome. And I like how you said that, Brad. It's kind of like a hurricane. It kind of gives you, once that hurricane's hit, you've got that image now, and it's kind of time to do away with that name and have something else. So that's awesome. This show has really went by so fast. We're closing in on the 9 o'clock hour. I knew it was going to be a good show when we talked about it at the end of last week. So we're going to kind of, I want to close it up. I know Joey's got his rant, and we'll kind of give our sign-offs. But one thing I do want to touch on before we kind of end the conversation is, as we look into the weekend, we're looking at what could be another heavy rain event, how that's going to affect the area.
Okay. So I guess I'll go. We'll start. We can finish up. I'm not looking forward to this weekend. Last weekend was a tough forecast. We got all this rain on Friday night to Saturday. Saturday ended up being halfway decent, and Sunday was sunny. Going into the weekend, if you would have asked me, I would have said the weekend was going to be a total washout. So this weekend is a little different. It looks like a little wedge boundary sets up. How far south it gets is a big question to me. And then we've got a wave of low pressure that's going to come along the boundary. It looks like Friday night into Saturday. So I think Chris and Chris are both going to have some really good rain, especially down in the upstate, Chris. I think you're going to get hammered again. It looks like nice upslope. Yeah, but the tough part for me is wedges in general are tough to forecast. The models always do a poor job with it. I know it's going to be cool Saturday and Sunday. How quickly does it scour out? And do we end up getting 3 days in the 70s again like we had last weekend?
Potential bust in the making here. That's the case. Where is all this going to set up and when, and how long is it going to hold its ground? It could be clearing out, and we could be in the 80s, and you forecast 78. So you could be 7 to 10 degrees off.
Well, you're right, because this time of year, the bust potential, because clouds and rain will keep in the 70s. But you're right, you get just a couple hours of sun, August sunshine, you could jump 15, 20 degrees, and it could be blazing hot and humid when you were forecasting cloudy and cool. So it's tough.
Yeah, and especially with wedge events in the summer, when you talk about them in the fall and winter, you know that there's a little bit of a bias towards erosion happening a little bit quicker than normal. Now, in the summer months when we don't normally see this, it's huge bust potential. And on our side of the mountains, we get that southeast flow just right. We're going to compress and warm a little bit, and maybe our rain chances aren't as high as we think they are.
Yeah, speaking of what you talked about, Brad, I was listening to, we do our radio forecast here for our coverage area, and I was listening to my pre-recorded, I was listening to it on Sunday, and I was like, man, I totally messed that one up, because it was, you look at it, and it looked like it was going to be a wet weekend, and then it ended up to be halfway decent. So I know this weekend, it seems like we've got in this pattern where we're getting more rain events on the weekend, so I know that's kind of bumming a lot of people out, especially with school about to go back in session and people trying to get their last-minute activities out of the way.
I feel better about Saturday's forecast right now than Sunday's. I'll tell you that. I feel pretty confident we're going to get soaked on Saturday, but Sunday, after what happened last weekend, I'm a little hesitant to go too crazy with the rain and clouds, but it wouldn't shock me either if it was cloudy, drizzly all day on Sunday.
Yeah, and Chris Justus, we'll definitely have to watch your area with already heavy rain coming through last week. 8 inches. I know it's been a week almost, but I'm sure the soil is still damp and not allowed to soak into the ground, and runoff's going to be a big issue in your area.
Exactly. We'll have to watch it closely, and mosquitoes will be the main thing until then.
Yes. Oof. Skeeter meter is high.
It's high today.
I know one thing, we didn't really talk about the wedge. Maybe we can get back on that. That's a very interesting topic, and how the wedge really affects our weather here in North Carolina, and how different it is. Like Chris was saying, it was 58 in Boone and 81 in Elizabeth, and that's what, 25, 30 miles away from each other. So maybe we could get back on that topic, have everybody back in. I
love the wedge.
It's a headache, that's for sure.
I mean, it's frustrating as a broadcaster, but as a meteorologist, it's one of the coolest phenomena to have, because it really tests your skill as a forecaster. I love the fact that the models are almost completely useless for you, and it makes you go back to old school forecasting when you do it. But there are hints, and every time I've interviewed a candidate for a job at our station, I said, go to the comment module on cold air damming and do it 50 times before you come here.
and Daniel, you and I like to joke around about it, because it seems like, especially in the wintertime, Burke and McDowell counties are one of the last counties to kind of lose the wedge, and we always have tons more freezing rain and ice accretion than anybody else around.
Think of all the cool events. We've got severe weather on the wedge boundary. We've had upslope flooding events with the wedge. We've had ice. We've had snow. I mean, there are so many variations of it too. It's just not forecasting the wedge. It's what happens within the wedge. As you guys know, some of those upslope icing events in Burke and Caldwell County have been unbelievable.
Yeah, I want to say 2009, 2010, Christmas time. I think almost an inch of ice, and just totally decimated a lot of areas up there. I mean, they were without power for almost 2 weeks, I believe. So crazy stuff happens on the wedge. Then the January 11th tornado.
Yep.
We could go on and on about, just
triple points and meso lows. It's awesome.
Crazy stuff. So definitely, Joey, we're going to be doing a wedge story soon. Okay?
Yeah, we'll have to fill that in one week. We'll do an entire show. We can do an entire show on the wedge.
The Carolina wedgie.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we'll kind of wrap up because I know some of you guys have to get going. We'll start with Ricky, and we'll work our way around. We'll let our panelists kind of give their outlets on social media, and then we will let Joey in with his rant. So, Ricky or Sam, you guys want to start?
Sure. You can always find me on Twitter at WXRJM. I'm actually in the process. School's Dean Department apparently want to use one of my pictures for a Christmas card. Last snowy winter, so hopefully we won't have another one before then. But for the next couple of days up here in Hampton Roads, kind of lower 80s for a day or two, and then we get a little bit of rain as we go into the weekend. Nothing too major. Most of the rain stays towards the south and towards the Charlotte area, I believe. So with that, we'll give it to Sam.
Yeah, well, the best way to follow me is on Twitter also. It's WeathermanSam77. Yeah, so not much going on with the weather besides this wedge thing this weekend. But one of the exciting things that's coming up next week is the State Climate Office is installing a new EcoNet station at Isothermal Community College. That's west of Charlotte. I know that, so I'll be joining them for that. I can't wait to see how that gets set up.
Yeah.
Daniel.
Well, anybody knows me, I'm usually keeping track of the McDowell weather page associated with Scotty and them, the Burke weather group also. If you ever want to email me with comments or any questions, you can email me at marianncwx@gmail.com. I'm on Twitter from time to time, SoApps1979. Just looking at what's going on, as Brad said a minute ago, we're going to have that system this weekend. It'll be interesting to see what happens, especially here on the eastern slopes of the Alps. That we get a good southeast wind. Feel pretty confident we're going to get that wedge. So what's been pretty nice this week is going to head downhill. But I will say one more thing. The football kids, this first week of football in North Carolina, they're loving this weather.
It's way better than 100 degrees in a helmet and pads, trust me.
Yes, sir.
That's true. And Daniel is the go-to guy on McDowell weather. Don't let him fool you on that. He's the man in charge up there. Chris Justus, I know you were needing to leave early. I don't know if that's changed or whatever, but I'll let you go ahead and give your information out. And thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me. My wife has a Bible study on Wednesday night, so I'm sure there's a bunch of ladies about to ring the doorbell any minute now. But thanks for having me, and on Facebook, and I look forward to joining you guys again soon.
Awesome, good deal. Chris Michaels.
Yeah, you guys can follow me on Twitter at WCYB_Michaels and on Facebook, Chris Michaels WCYB. Our next few days of weather, I'm pulling the split shift this weekend, so I'll be tracking the rain all day, all night. Looks like we could have some overriding of a stationary front. Also looks like we could have a limiting force at the southeast wind, so this should be pretty interesting to see. The models still are having a boxing match together, and some are calling for some upper-level pulses north of the front, so could be an interesting weekend ahead. And thank you guys for having me. I'll be back next week.
Yes, he will. And Brad, once again, our man with the plan. So happy to have Brad on all the time. So, Brad, how can we follow you if we're not already following you?
You can follow me on Twitter at WXBrad. You can look me up on Facebook there, or Brad Panovich at WCNC, Google+, kind of all over the place, but Twitter's usually where I spend a majority of my time at. You can also check out my blog, which hopefully I'll have a new post coming up soon, WXBrad.com, on this whole confirmation bias and bubbles over everybody's houses that makes it not rain. For us here, I'm with all these guys. It's going to be an interesting forecast this weekend. We could have a ton of rain. We could have flooding issues. We could have even maybe a little severe threat, depending on how things shape up. Or it could just be one of those cloudy, gloomy, kind of dreary weekends. Either way, it's going to be an interesting forecast on the weekend, and I'm already getting the haters because it's going to rain on the weekend, and not much you can do about it. Enjoy the weather today while you can.
Joey, I'll let you do it, and then I'll finish us up.
All right, I guess it's my time. First off, I'm out of practice with this. I've been away for a couple of weeks, so but last week I found something that was strikingly interesting. It came from the Weather Channel. It was posted on their site. under the headline, Bad News for Millions. That was actually the headline. When you pull it up, it turns out the headline of the article was Southern Megapolis, pest-ridden and traffic-choked to stretch from Raleigh to Atlanta by 2060. In other words, apparently in the southeast, from Raleigh to Atlanta, and they go on to mention all the way to Birmingham, apparently the entire I-85 corridor is going to explode into some kind of massive city and be full of rats and bears and just all kinds of complete horrible destruction right off the Hunger Games. I don't know, but that's the way the article said it to me. And it went on to talk about this massive urban expansion area through that area, and it was going to cause this, just doomsday scenario. And I'm like, for one, okay, maybe we're pouring too much concrete. I get that, okay, but let's be. It's from Raleigh to Birmingham. That's it. I mean, these people they never go to Chicago or New York City. I was just there last month. The last time I checked, there's still more concrete going up in New York City than there ever will be in the Southeast. But apparently only us are going to be affected by this great megapolis, like it calls, which actually sounds kind of cool. I don't know if that's a bad thing. But anyway, so get ready. By 2060, we'll be infested with bears because we've overtook their habitat. But just don't worry. If you don't live along the I-85 corridor, apparently you're safe because there is no urban development in other places in this country. So thank you, the Weather Channel, and Terrell Johnson. Yeah, I just called you out by name since you wrote the article. You know how to reach me, Catawba County Weather on Facebook. You can find me there. Email addresses. I'll list my phone number. Call me. I don't care. We'll talk about it over the phone. But anyway, there's my rant for the week. If you guys want have anything to say about that, again, like I said, I guess Al Roker and Jim Cantori have never been to anywhere that has urban expansion other than Greenville, South Carolina. I don't get that. But anyway, look out for the great megalopolis of Spartanburg. Chris, I'm looking at you.
I know it.
I guess you drew them all in down there, apparently.
I guess we did.
But anyway, you guys can go find that article. It was posted back on July 31st on their Facebook page, weather.com, that I'm referring to. We'll post the link later and let you guys, let all of our viewers jump in on their thoughts of that bear-infested, pest-ridden disaster of Hunger Games proportion that they're trying to tell us is going to happen. So that's me for the week. Again, up here in Catawba County, same thing everybody else said about the weather. I'm not going to go on with that. I will point out again that I am the guy that married the New York Times best-selling author, just so everybody knows. I'm not rubbing that in or anything, but I was smart enough to do that. So, Scotty, take us home.
Awesome. Thank you, Joey. Next week, we're going to be talking about precipitation probabilities. Try saying that 5 times fast. Chris Michaels is going to join us again, and we're going to try to wrangle somebody from the coast. If not, we may pull Tim Buckley in or maybe somebody else. Brad, if you're available. Chris, if you're available. You guys can come join us, too. So we're going to talk.
What Scotty just said was we have connections, just so everybody knows.
Yeah.
That's my favorite topic, pops, yes.
Oh,
50% chance of rain means 100% chance of confusion. I love it.
That's it. Yeah. And actually, Chris Michaels chose that topic. That was what he wanted to talk about. So that is what we are going to be discussing next week. So you can join us 8 o'clock next week. For us, you can follow us at Burke Weather Inc. on Facebook and at Burke WX on Twitter. Follow us. We're all closing in on 17,000 people, so we're coming after you, Panovich. Watch out.
Hey, and it
Talk
even
to Chris. Chris has got a bunch down there in the upstate now.
It's going crazy lately.
we're even kissing up on 3,000 here in McDowell County, where nobody lives.
We're about to close in on 3,000 on McDowell, so that's awesome.
That's really impressive. Yeah.
Especially they're 20 years behind everything, so you know.
Is there a prison in McDowell County?
Yeah, actually there is.
They'll get internet at that prison another 5 years.
Oh gosh. So everybody, thank you for watching. Ashley, thank you for watching us tonight. Have a great night. We'll see you next Wednesday.
Well, Ashley, we'll leave
wait,
on that.
We get personal call-outs now? What's going on here?
Look at that, huh?
Man, and I would go ahead and stop the broadcast, but I'm gonna let Scotty sit there and blush for a minute. It goes the camera. All right, that was the end of my show. Thank you. Bicycle.